we all suffer, and we understand it here best through our lumber. So I would consistently vote to get the government out of control of the natural resources, except for reasonable common sense controls. There are things you don't want done. You don't want mining activity that destroys the environment and so on. But then you have to get the state people out of control. Mainly our problems are federal in controlling our natural resources, and I would do everything I could to free natural resources so that our people can produce and be prosperous again. We live on a continent that's so rich in natural resources, we could exhaust them in thousands of years. And without access to those resources, we can't prosper. I would do everything I could to correct that. And immediate federal action is to get these federal agencies to act normally instead of bureaucratically.
Anne, you got a question? Question 1, please.
Question 1. On page 223. Do I need the microphone or?
Yeah. Just raise your voice.
Okay. Question 1. On page 223, chapter 18, you stated that we should conduct ourselves so that those in other countries admire us, our liberty, security, offer, and trade, so that they seek to emulate our liberty and prosperity, and so that they realize that an attack upon our country would be met with overwhelming force by the finest military that has ever existed. What are your plans for how to inspire our United States of America citizens, including their elected representatives, to return to that conduct?
Well, firstly, Congress must return to that conduct. Congress, the Constitution says you cannot go to war without a congressional vote. Congress hasn't taken a vote like that in a long time. They prefer a situation where they take the credit if it goes well, they blame somebody else if it goes wrong, they let the executive do it. The Constitution says our troops shouldn't go into combat without congressional vote. That must be the way, and I would always vote that way, and I would also argue very strenuously to my colleagues to do it. The United States has been the greatest positive influence the world has ever known. But it did it by example. From children to adults to nations, everybody learns by example. There are billions of people on the earth today who are trying to lift themselves from poverty and tyranny by following the example of the United States, by following our methods of excellence. And our methods of excellence arose because that's what naturally arises among free people. And we were an entirely new experiment in human history in setting the individual above the state. And then you know what happened, American exceptionalism. So we need to lead by example, be overwhelmingly strong, and follow our Constitution. And the Congress has not been doing this, especially they haven't taken their responsibilities properly with respect to war. So, and the other thing I would mention, when he's going to put up, the other thing I would mention is that, of course, we know that government programs are wasteful, but the government of the United States is tasked with our defense. There will always be some waste in the defense, but we would have a lot less waste if Congress would stop meddling with that budget. We need to give the money to the professionals, watch them to see that they defend the country, but stop having situations where congressmen use the defense budget as a pork barrel to get things in their district, weapon systems the military doesn't need, all kinds of things, so that they can get campaign cash from special interests. I think if Congress got out of the way, the money were more unrestricted, and our professionals did the job, we get more defense for less money.
Thank you. That was a answer to Anne. Okay. Any follow-up on that from anybody? We were under 3 minutes. We have been for most of these, so all of them.
Congratulations.
Yeah, Art, you're doing a fantastic job. Well, let's see. I have a question for you. In chapter 29, regarding counting the votes, you have some recommendations that might dispel the distrust people feel in the present system in Oregon, especially in handling of the votes. where would you begin with this reform?
Well, that reform begins in Salem, of course. Salem controls how we vote. And my son and I, Noah, who made that suggestion, went up to see Bruce Hanna right after the election last time and started talking to him about it, because anything like that has to come from Salem. The problem is, first, many people, especially after the elections, they distrust the vote. Now, I'm not here to tell you that the vote isn't honest, but we did study it very carefully because of what we've been doing. We actually recounted a few precincts in each county, not because we thought the election would be changed, because we wanted to learn the system. And as I mentioned in there, I gave the example of Caltech students when I was there changing the Rose Bowl card stunts. You give me two of those guys and a set of lockpicks, I can change any congressional election in this state. And that's not because of dishonesty within the system that I know of. It's because the mail-in ballot has an inherent problem. The problem is it's around too long. The ballot sits there for days and days and days under whatever security is there and so forth. So that it's easy to change, and also because they have to remark about 10% of the ballots because they are, for one reason or another, not suitable to go through the machines, there has to be a very big pile of unmarked ballots sitting there too. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that these have been marked wrong or that the vote has been dishonest, but a lot of our people worry about it. They shouldn't have to worry, and the clerk shouldn't have people looking over their shoulders wondering if they're honest. And there is one way to fix it, and that's what we suggested in the book. It's an idea my son said. Simply put a random number on each ballot, put a tab with the random number. Only the person filling out the ballot knows the number. He pulls his tab off, and later he's allowed to check how that random number was scored when they counted the ballots. If you do that, it doesn't matter how long the ballots lay around. Everybody can check later how his ballot was counted. It would greatly increase confidence. It would stop all of this worry and rumors and everything else about dishonest ballots. The other thing about the mail-in ballot, when you talk to politicians, which I'm not one, but I've talked to a lot of politicians, especially national politicians, they say, boy, Oregon's a terrible problem. You got the mail-in ballot. They're not talking about honest counting. They're talking about the fact that more people vote. And it's a way that the other side gets out to vote more because it's easier to vote. That's another issue. But anyway, we can fix this. But right now, it's trivial to cheat in our system. I'm not suggesting they're doing it. I'm suggesting we should stop. We should plug that hole so we don't have to worry about it.
Thank you. Chuck, I think yours is a state question, but I'm sure you can, or it's a local question.
Norman, I received this question from a local lady down, a senior citizen down in Huntsville. And she wanted to know, what could you do, and her son is a teacher in the local system, what could you do to help them because the teachers are being cut back because the burdens on them, the taxes and everything. And that was her question because we said we were supporting her around. Well, what can he do to help?
Yeah, we see an ordinary politician who would say, hey, I got a bill in, it'll get some money for your particular school district. I'll get you some pork. I'll get you some money. That's the politician's answer. But that's unprincipled. The money would come from somebody in Texas, right, or somebody else. The problem is the one we mentioned earlier. The fact is the government is wasting money by the ton, by the carload. Right now they're borrowing 45 cents of every dollar they're spending. They're spending money like water on all kinds of things we don't need. And fiscally, our country is in really terrible danger. And of course, this is affecting the other local governments, state governments. The economy has been smashed by the United States Congress. That's where the trouble lies. So if we get Congress to act responsibly, to tear down the regulations, lower the taxes, lower the burden it is on our private enterprise so that it can thrive more readily, then there will be more money for the things we need to do. And we've always funded our schools as much as we can. I mean, this man knows about bringing money to the locality. And within the localities, our local governments, quite rightly, should be competing with all the other local governments for a better business environment, more money for their schools, and everything else. That's why federalism works. The 50 states compete. But the federal government is almost always a negative influence in this regard because it's one agency 3,000 miles away where bureaucrats are making decisions that affect the lives of other people, and there's no effective feedback. They just keep making mistakes. So basically, I would do everything I could to get the nose of the government out of the affairs of the American people and out of our local and state affairs so that they could thrive. It's the only way to get that money back. If you don't do that, there's going to be less and less resources and more teachers fired. The other thing is, of course, our schools are top-heavy with administrators, and if you look at the school budgets, we spend $10,000 per student on average across the country. Less than half of that money reaches the classroom. That's both a state and federal problem, and we need to fix it.
There hasn't been a question on the Second Amendment. Would you like to speak to that a little bit? The Second Amendment.
Well, the Second Amendment is pretty simple. It reads clearly, and we're supposed to have free access to firearms, or to weapons, firearms. And that was not put there just so we could go hunting. The Founding Fathers thought it was an extremely important freedom. We have been gradually winning on this across the country. More and more localities have been increasing gun freedom. And I put a graph in the book. It's incredible. In 20 states that made firearms more accessible to their people, average, after 10 years, violent crime in those states had dropped by a factor of 2, and it's still going down. And that's not because people with gun permits were shooting it out in the streets with the criminals. It's because, on average, states are about like Oregon. If gun permits are easy to get, concealed weapon permits, about 5% of the people will sign up, and about 1% will carry guns. The problem is the criminals don't know which 1%, and it works. So it certainly makes our streets safer, and it's a fundamental human right, and you have to. Our main threat right now comes from the United Nations. The United Nations is trying to get a treaty and trying to get the United States to pass a treaty which would confiscate our guns, and we have to watch out for that. And there's some danger because the United States Senate is not where treaties are ratified, is not nearly as principled as it used to be on this issue. So and there are probably some big fights coming up because the president would like to sign that treaty, the president we have now. In this district, even my opponent has to look like he's strong for guns. I don't know whether I have time to tell. I illustrate by a story when I was running in the primary last time. You know, I was running against Janie Vermont, and we were over in a seniors home over in Coos Bay, and the sheriff of Coos County was officiating. Somebody asked me that question, and I said, oh, well, our family's strong for the Second Amendment. We all have concealed weapons permits. But I said, I'm not carrying a gun right now. I don't know quite what's appropriate for a political rally. And I got the same response, right? Wrong thing to say. Janie was speaking next. She had her gun. and then the sheriff of Coos County, Andy Jackson, speaks up. He says, I want to assure Dr. Robinson he can carry his gun in my county anytime he wants. And he came to about at least 6 of my speeches over the campaign, and he always checked to see if I had it. And I want to tell you, the scene is, I remember once, I see Andy and I run for my car. He was great. Finally, at the end, the last time I ever saw this man, he takes me aside, he says, Art, you have to understand, the permits are wrong too. We shouldn't have any restrictions. But anyway, in this county, the issue is pretty clear, and we're pretty clear on it.
Okay, wonderful. Do you want to take a breathing break? Okay, we'll go straight into questions from the floor.
3 minutes, Leslie.
3 minutes still replies, yes. And
Margaret.
I'll leave it to you, Art. You can point out.
No, you point.
You want to? Okay.
There's a lady over there.
Margaret there.
Okay, Margaret.
Can I read my second question?
Sure.
Since nobody's brought it up, I thought I'd bring it up because this is a federal question. May I have that too? In case. On page 261 plus, my 75-year-old friend and a veteran is on Obamacare. Last week he was told by his doctor he is too old and too sick to get any more care. He should consider ending his life. This was literally brought up by his doctor. One person in this room received a Dear John letter because he is on Obamacare and the doctor cannot continue having the percentage of Medicare and Obamacare patients that he has between all of his patients in order to keep his office going. And another received a letter that the procedure of endoscopy, I can't talk in English, which was prescribed for him by his doctor, is not relevant and necessary at his age of 85. Therefore, he is being denied services. What are you going to do to help our seniors?
Well, speaking first about the veteran, I think that every veteran should have better medical care than any congressman.
Yeah.
There's no danger in being well, there might be if this thing gets worse, but there's no danger in being a congressman. You understand. It's a privilege to be a congressman, and you shouldn't be a congressman for very long. But they have a problem. We have promised medical care to our veterans, and they should get it. In my opinion, the VA, it's going to be a bureaucracy. It's going to have the problems of a government program. It's underfunded now, which is one of the reasons it has problems. But I think that any veteran should be able to go to any medical facility in this country, get the best care he can, and send the bill to the government. I have an old friend. He's about 85 years old. We take care of him. He's been a sort of member of our family for a long time. In facto, he was a veteran. He was also an airline pilot. He had a disease that nobody around could diagnose. He went to doctor after doctor. They don't want to see him because of Medicare and so forth. Finally, I took him to the Mayo Clinic. They diagnosed it and gave him the appropriate medicine. I think any vet should be able to sign up, go to the Mayo Clinic. It takes about 3 weeks to get in, get that care, and send the bill to the government. If the government can run a medical system that gives the vets everything they need, great. If they want to run it that way, that's fine. Let it compete with private enterprise. But no vet should have to wait. And that, of course, to the general issue. There's a graph in the book. The cost of medical care in this country, normalized to personal income, has tripled since 1970. You haven't gotten much more medical care for that. A few imaging machines, there's a little bit of technology advance, but mainly you're getting the same medical care you got then. Yet it costs 3 times as much. That money's not going to the doctors. It's not going for your care. It's going for the vast, monopolistic mess that our Congress has made out of our medical care system. By the time you get the associations and the bureaucrats and the corporations which are in it and the whole mess, big medicine, like big education, we were skirting around a little bit ago, is now sucking 3 times as much resources out of the American people and giving them the same medical care and enslaving the doctors. The politicians in this election say, I will take the rich man's money and give it to you, vote for me. They also say, I will take the physician's skills and give them to you, vote for me. That's socialized medicine. It's unprincipled and ineffective by any measure.
Thank you. Over there. Actually, you had your hand up first. Thanks.
Yeah, Art, I was just wondering about one thing, because your field is atomic energy. Am I right on that? Or?
I'm a physical chemist, but I've written about energy for a long time.
Okay. I was curious about with this nuclear disaster in Japan that took place about a year or so ago. Has this indicted nuclear power even more? Because I know there's a school of thought against it to begin with, so has this made it worse?
Yeah, I've been told that my support of nuclear energy makes people nervous, and I shouldn't talk that much. But the fact is, at that accident, there were thousands of dead bodies all around the plant from the tsunami. Not one person died because of the nuclear problem. At Chernobyl, 30 people died. At 3 Mile Island, no one died. Total casualties in nuclear power accidents worldwide have claimed 30 lives in the last 25 years. During that time, we killed 1 million people on our highways. So not every one of those deaths was a tragedy. Every death on the highway was a tragedy. But this is misplaced. There have been substantial casualties in nuclear power accidents. Chernobyl was the worst. Tens of thousands of women in Western Europe aborted the children that they wanted to have because the media told them those children would be mutated because of the Chernobyl accident. The cost to us from this propaganda that has been directed against this particular industry has been enormous. The textbooks used at Oregon State in nuclear reactor in engineering predict what private enterprise was planned, what they expected private enterprise to build between 1976 and 2000 in terms of nuclear power. It's about 6 times what we really have because of the government shutdown of it 30 years ago. The equivalent of the electrical energy that those plants would have generated is 20 Hoover dams in every state, with a footprint so small you wouldn't even have known they were there. So if you can imagine the United States with 20 Hoover dams, the equivalent of 20 Hoover dams in every state, and electric power at 2 cents a kilowatt hour instead of the 10 you pay today, imagine the difference. China wouldn't be making 46% of the world's steel while we make 6%. Our energy industries our energy-intensive industries would not have been driven abroad with the jobs and everything else and wealth that they would have created, and we would be having electricity at a fifth the cost. And I might add, not a single death has occurred in any of the 104 nuclear power plants that we have and have been operating an average of 30 years. This is safe technology that's been misrepresented. I'll tie this remark on to the next question because I can game case them.
Art, a big push is being put onto the people on water rights. My well, there's a guy down there in Medford, you know about him, he's gone to jail, they call him the Rain Man. The timber's been stolen. They're attacking water, and if you attack water, you've attacked life.
So what's your question?
Water rights.
Water rights. Well, of course, you know some, but most of that attack is state. The state is a big problem for us in that. We have to deal with Salem. There is some federal involvement, and that should stop. And I would do everything I could to stop it. And you have to stop telling me about it. The state claims to own every drop of water that falls. If you have a depression in the ground and they want to register your pond, they'll say you can fill it once a year. And if you say, wait a minute, the runoff automatically fills it 3 times a year, they'll build some ditches. You're not allowed to let the rain run into it more than 1 pond worth a year. They're crazy. And in fact, I understand a man in Medford was just jailed the other day about that situation. So that's just an essential natural resource, and the bureaucrats are constantly getting between us and our water. And it's a bad state problem, and it's a partial federal problem that needs to be solved. Do I have 2 minutes?
Yes, you do.
One thing I want to point out, we've become sort of complacent. We know that our liberty's been eroded, but we're becoming complacent. My friend Scott Carpenter likes to point out that the 3 bad accidents in the space program were not caused by engineering errors, they were caused by complacence. They knew they were doing dangerous things, but they got used to it. We've become complacent. That's why we're getting into trouble. And we also slide gradually into that trouble, so we don't quite realize what's getting. But there's a contrast that's stark that I think is worth thinking about. It's in the book. The median family income in our district is $40,000. Our district is the same size as Switzerland and far richer in natural resources. The Swiss median family income is $120,000. Imagine your town, your county, your district, if everybody had 3 times as much money. And the difference is the Swiss have very low regulations, very low taxes, and a very benign, small federal government. I had a Swiss lady that came and spoke up in one of my talks about 2 weeks ago. She says, I'm for Switzerland, and you're exactly right. Then she came to see me after the talk, and she said, you know, I didn't want to say this during the talk, but even if you lose, your book helped teach people what the problem is. Mm-hmm. That is a huge problem. Imagine, are the Swiss any better than us? Are they any stronger? Are they any brighter? Are they any hardworking? No, but their government puts almost no tax burden, almost no regulatory burden on the Swiss people, and that's why they're making. Now, I obviously picked the most stark example on the other side, but it happens to be just the size of this district, and we have a lot more natural resources. Think about that. When you gradually try to fight back, you fight from what you're used to, but what you could be, you often don't see.
Okay, Richard. We've got about 8 minutes left, and you probably want to sum it up. So
Well, I don't know. Maybe
it's up to you. Do you want to take another question? We'll certainly take this question.
I don't know, Mike. I asked you some time ago what percentage of this district is owned by the federal government.
Yeah, I really should find out. Josephine County is 70%, county I live in, and Pete's trying to make it more right now. He's got ideas to add to it. They're trying to add to it over in Coos County. My impression, I don't know what, my impression is that it's over 50% in the whole district, but I don't know the exact number. My county's 70, there are others that are in the 60s. It's really high because they claim all the forests. Of course, they're broke. They ought to sell them to us to pay some of their debts, but that's another matter.
Counties in this district are going broke. We can't generate revenue off of federal lands. At what point, and wasn't it originally a point of state sovereignty? At what point?
These are all 10th Amendment issues.
If we're owned.
They're all 10th Amendment issues. What we let our Congress do, first, the Congress used to be made up of citizen volunteers. For 100 years, the first 100 years, the average congressman served 2 to 3 years. Now it's 10 to 12. Our guy's 25. Once they do that, they have nothing to go back to. Their career is their whole life. On one side of their desk is their personal self-interest. On the other side of their desk is the nation's interest. And thousands, tens of thousands of decisions by these guys, all in their own self-interest, have subverted the Constitution, especially the 10th Amendment, and have given them re-election and given us gradually more and more problems. That's where we are.
I had a question about conflicting information. You know, one side has one story, the other side has the other story. Would you take a moment and speak to the importance of vetting sources and how you go about
It would be good. I've learned a little bit about this. You know, I've had a chapter on it at the end of the book. It is astonishing. Pete's got out a new cartoon, very funny, based on Mr. Rogers. You know, and I'm Mr. Rogers, and I'm absolutely nuts. And then the Register Guard ran a nice article saying, "Hey, this is a great cartoon," pointed to his website. Then they called me with a fact checker from the Register Guard after they'd done all this. And they were going back and forth about, you know, how far should he go. And finally I said to her, something I referred to here, I said, well, look at it this way. If I'm a scientist, I have 100 pages of data on a hypothesis. One page sort of supports the one, and the other 99 pages disprove it. If I publish just the one page, that's dishonest. And I thought the connection broken on the phone. The silence, you know what to say. And the dishonesty is unbelievable. And I had another way I put it. Truthfully, if I believed 5% of what this guy puts on TV, I wouldn't have dinner with myself. And that it seemed to be the way this works. So I didn't know what to do about it because it's a free market. I just noticed we were going over yesterday where Pete spent his money in 2010. He spent $175,000 in one television station in Lane County, and the owners of the station donated to our campaign. Which then I thought about it and decided that's appropriate. Look at all the money, look at all the business we got him. So this is a problem. You have to have total freedom to say anything you want, but the voters should pay more attention to the integrity of what they say. We're getting to the point now where it doesn't matter what. Well, look, Matthew ran against this guy, remember, in the primary? And it was a lot of fun. It was his deal, not mine. There was only one thing wrong with the race. There should have been 20 grad students running against him. I think there should have been so many grad students in that primary race you couldn't find Pete's name on the ballot. Because he and his people and their policies are wrecking the futures of those students. But you may remember during the voting, during the balloting, they put out a story. Matthew Robinson lied in his voters pamphlet. Went all over on the AP wire. Sent it to the Secretary of State, a complaint. Well, the Secretary of State threw it out, but that was too late. It was after the voting. This whole thing is very unprincipled. But you just have to fight in the battle you have. And they're trying to teach me how to do it.
Okay, Art. Thank you. Thank you, Art. I know we could go on all day, and Art will remain behind after the meeting for a little while, correct? You'll remain behind after the meeting for a little while to answer a question. Thank you. And please, if you have not read this book, you can read it over and over again and get new stuff out of it. It's a wonderful book. Support art. Take a book if you haven't got one. In the back is an envelope to support his campaign. And before we end,
And the magnetic signs that stick to all motor cars and
that's
trucks.
right, yeah.
They're on the floor for protection of the cable, not for you to stand on.
Our meeting next week is going, for the first time,